Now I tore the original gasket when I took this apart and removed it, so there won't be a gasket in this. Oftentimes I will, thank you, Urs.
Yep, no problem.
Oftentimes I'll pull over the edge of the bench and put an oil pan on the floor. I've also got a breakdown table over there. We chose not to work on it. I can squeegee it down the drain hole. One thing I do want to throw in there, there's many different methods and styles outside of the OEM service manual on repairs, maintenance. There's items available that some use. People run them, have excellent luck, will swear by them. A lot of the modification side of anything comes through trial and error and opinion. My opinion is not the only way. Other people like to do things differently. Anything that I say, when I do portray an opinion, I am not saying that that's how it has to be, but there is a bushing in here that's failed that I am absolutely opposed to, and we'll discuss that when we get there. But the carnage that it left behind is undeniable in the savings, in the cost savings between just replacing the part with a new OEM one or buying sealed bushing for $5, regardless of what everyone else says. You will never see me install this repair bushing that we're going to get to. So we pull the clutch cover and we're going to look for extra play here. The clutch boss gets worn, especially with these aftermarket clutches and heavy duty springs. So when you back these bolts out, let me grab a T-wrench. In a normal engine, these bosses are threaded. These screws should be 7 foot-pounds, no more. Just past a light snug. If you don't have a torque wrench, you seat it and give it a little squish and it's done. I wanted to point out this clutch boss because nothing is wrong with it except for the fact that it has a lot of history. This is your screw that retains your spring, and it threads into this clutch boss. This bore isn't as bad as some of them on this clutch, but I can literally put a 1/2 inch of bolt in there before I even start the thread. These guys, the threads wear out, they expand, the clutch boss gets fatigued. Some of that comes from stress of over tightening it, some of it comes from the heavy duty springs to hold back the power levels that some of these stockish play engines are building. But long story short, this clutch boss, even though nothing is broken, is it's something that I would replace, and this one will get replaced. It's not something I would put back. The carnage from these screws popping off or lifting out under extreme pressure with the clutch being open just isn't worth. I think this clutch boss, brand new OEM, is under $60. So, you know, considering the carnage, why would you risk that? So that's something that I wanted to point out. It's something you do need to pay attention to and inspect on your disassembly, and make your best judgment call on those posts. It's you know, I can stick a 1/2 inch of stud in there before I even find the worn out taper part of the thread. So long story short, before this thing even seats, you're still lucky the threads hold on. And these fasteners are just begging to lift the threads. It's cast aluminum, it's soft, and these fasteners are just begging to lift the threads. So that's your inspection on the clutch boss. And I'm not going to sit and do every single one slow on by hand, but that's what you need to take the time checking. Okay, now this particular engine was a race engine, and somewhere along the way the pancake bearing that was installed is gone. This engine was built with a pancake bearing. It's a modified bearing. The OEM bearing does not spin freely. It is indexed, and this set screw right here is where you adjust your clutch lever at. But what happens with this is this spins with the pressure plate while everything else spins. You know, your main shaft is spinning at a different speed. There's a ball in there that's a pivot ball. It will wear right there. It will wear the end of the push rod, and very quickly, especially if you're revving the engine a lot with the clutch pulled and all the pressure on that ball, very quickly you'll generate heat at that pivot ball, and it'll weld either to this, to the clutch rod, to both, sometimes to the degree that it mushrooms out and welds the transmission shaft and dictates a new shaft. So the Pancake bearing, the nickname modded Pancake bearing, it's a Torrington bearing and a free-floating adjuster, allows this pressure plate to spin freely from your adjuster and also spin freely, and the welding problem is all but cured. We do sell those, and you can check that. You can find those on our online store. They are a must, even for a stock engine. They're just a must. The clutches are pretty cut and dry. You're looking for burning and bluing. These ones are burnt, but they're not warped, depending on what you're doing. This would not make a very good usage for like a dune engine, but we like to see a little bit of the blue rings for the drag engines where you're wanting induced slipping. If they're not warped, we'll surface those, and we're happy to see those. But in a normal case and a normal play engine and normal usage, the heat that was generated in this clutch, it would call for a new clutch pack change. There's a fold washer underneath your main hub nut. You're going to want to bend the tab straight. Of course, since I've removed this, it's already straight. I didn't want to break it off by putting it back. That lock washer is a must to replace, and same with the one that's similar to it on the sprocket side. They're one-time use. When you open them, regardless if it looks good or not, throw it away. They're cheap and they're not worth the carnage. We're going to pull the inner hub and go ahead and move forward. This is pretty standard. Your stock baskets will get real big grooves right here where your fingers ride. If that's the case, we carry these heavy-duty billet baskets. What happens when the grooves and on the inner hub, usually not as bad on the inner hub. This one's got good wear though, but the bolts are going to dictate its change. If these grooves get deep enough, the plates that ride in them, these tabs on the frictions index to that clutch basket. If those grooves get deep enough, you can have your bike under load. It will plant these fingers into the grooves on the clutch basket. You'll pull the clutch, but they won't release. If you have a bike you've had for a long time and all of a sudden neutral gets very hard to attain, or you begin missing shifts a lot when you're kind of speed shifting out playing, chances are this primary gear right here is loose in its cushions to the basket, and the grooves in the basket are not allowing the frictions to release, even though the pressure plate releases. The pressure keeps them all bound up. The steel one splines to this and will keep it all bound up, and it's almost like you didn't pull the clutch at all. You start experiencing real hard, you start experiencing things like it's real hard to get in neutral, miss shifts because it didn't quite attain the next gear, things like that. Look at your clutch basket, make sure it's not stepped real bad. These billet baskets that are aftermarket, they're strong, they're serviceable, and in my opinion it'll still happen to them. This one has the anodizing wore off, but it's not grooved, it's relatively smooth still. But that feature lasts a lot longer than an OEM basket. Here you can see it on this one as I roll around and get off the light. Anyway, you can see them, but you can't really feel them too much, so it's not that bad. Definitely something that needs to be taken into consideration. Remove your hub nut, your folding lock washer. This heavy washer goes between the inner hub and the clutch basket. These get surface wear. You're going to look at them for a lot of craters going in. You can see where they ride at. You want to feel that they're flat. Yes, they'll have a wear pattern. This one doesn't have any stepping. It's fine. If it has a bit of a step, I recommend changing it. If there's any question, change it. These parts do add up a little bit, but they're all cheap individually and strictly circumstantial. I want to touch on another thing before I pull this apart. ATF. This is an opinion thing. Do not run ATF in your bikes. People have done it for years. Old clutches were asbestos. ATF does not support these parts properly. This bushing right here is extremely loose because it was not supported. There's an intermediate steel bushing that rides on a brass oiled bushing, a pressure bushing right there, and it's the right clearance. And this bushing, because it was not supported, has hourglass shaped the brass bushing, making it loose, and then there's two surfaces here and here that ride on this steel shaft. This bushing did not have good enough oil support. It grooved this shaft, and this bushing is literally loose on that shaft, and that's because it wasn't suspended properly. A lot of opinion on that. A lot of guys will tell you they run ATF fine, drag racers especially, because they're fighting clutch slippage, but there's other ways to tame that problem besides the demise of your components. This groove is very deep for the age of this washer and normal usage. This is your bearing race worn, and there's the sleeve for that spacer, and both of them have stepped ground a pretty decent step in this other thick thrust washer that goes behind the clutch basket. That's fast wear in my opinion. Some of these Banshee engines have been unopened for over 20 years and they don't even look like that. And this one's a couple years old. Okay, the steel bushing I touched on. Don't buy that steel bushing. Don't try and save your kick idle gear. It's 60 bucks. That was a steel bushing. Steel on steel, especially with ATF, does not provide the proper support. Somewhere this transmission has eaten a snap ring and a washer with a flat, a D washer. The bushing is all but gone. It has pulled it, it has walked it and burned it paper thin, and it's gone. That's what the gear did to the back of the clutch basket. If you can see that pretty pattern on that ring, there we go. If you can see that pretty pattern, that gear was rubbing the clutch basket. Further, that kick idle gear went past the teeth that it engages into and was literally running into the casting behind the gear, so it was planting all the way deep, creating a bind. That's how they ride together. It was creating a bind against the back of that gear. If this kick idle gear sticks to this clutch basket and binds and pulls at an angle because of all that bushing wear, the kicker gear right here can hang up, and the end result will be either carnage to this kicker shaft or this section of your case getting blown out and a broken case. And that's over a $4 bushing. Lots of guys say they use them. Lots of guys have had okay luck. Here is your proof. This is one of those repair bushings, and that is the end result. And this is not the only engine that we have seen this on. So I just wanted to point that out. And again, I stress it's an opinion thing. A lot of guys will tell you that that repair bushing that various other shops sells is just fine, but I implore to you, it is not. I have opened many engines that's had carnage based on that steel replacement bushing. Just replace this gear. It's not worth a broken case. It's not worth a chewed up clutch basket. This gear needs to be replaced anyway. The teeth are hammered, so that bushing saved nothing. You had to replace the gear anyway. Further, because of the rocking and because of the damage, he gets to replace this gear as well. The spring that this gear rides on is shot, and we'll get into that. Plus, this kicker has been hanging up, and he's lucky he doesn't have a broken case. I'll try and get the camera to zoom, and I'll focus on that here in a minute. To release your kicker, just release the spring and back it out. Now you can see the damage. Let me get it to the camera. You can see the damage, and I don't know why I'm having troubles with zooming in light today, but in any case, these teeth are hurt all the way around. This spring has been collapsed and has lost its tension, and this foot is the stop on the case. It has been beveled back. This particular owner is very, very lucky that he did not lose his case over the deal. Let me take this apart so we can look around the gear and see how it goes in the case. Many of you guys know, many of you guys you know, are learning, so unclip the bushing, slide the spring off, slide the gear off. Now this shaft goes in the case like this. When you kick it, see that swinging tab? That stops on the case. That's the home position. When you kick it, it comes up like this, and then the spring that winds up and hooks on the post returns it. It smacks the case right there. Right here where that stops on the case, we've seen them blow out because of that. If hers can focus into the here, you can see it right there. Okay, that's pretty close. It's not showing the detail as well as I'd like. However, you can see the groove, and I'll describe that groove's better than 1/8 of an inch deep. So this thing was colliding very hard in the case, and we're actually lucky to not have a broken case in that region. This will need to be replaced now, as well as the tension spring that rolls around the back of the kick idle gear, or the kicker gear, I'm sorry. That's not very much tension in that spring, and that will need to be changed. So all of that wear because of a $4 steel bushing. I have my opinion on it, others have theirs on it. I'll repeat again, if you ask my opinion, don't go that route. Buy a kick idle gear. It's not worth the carnage trying to save. He's going to be a lot more in replacing the side effects of that cheap bushing in parts than he would have been to just do it right the first time. Okay, we'll move on. We're going to separate. We're going to get the primary gear off the crank. We're going to pull the shift shaft. This was another thing I wanted to point out. There's a locking washer here. It has come loose because this eccentric post locates the claws over the shifter and returns it from the next gear selection. This eccentric post right here has gotten loose in the case, and you can see it literally moving with the shifter. So I imagine he probably experienced a couple missed shifts, had some hard times with his downshifts and whatnot. This post is actually off center, it's cammed, it turns, and it adjusts the up and down movement of these claws with the little cam that's on it, so that these claws can be centered to the shift star while it's in gear on the initial setup. So that's a little something you need to look at and make sure that you're good and secure and snug there. Again, this folding lock washer here, replace it. Don't reuse it. They're cheap and not worth it. So it's the little things that make the big differences, and those are areas you don't want to cut a corner on. That kind of wraps up. That was really quick. It kind of wraps up the initial teardown, besides getting into the cases and splitting the cases. We'll continue by doing that. That is as far as I made it on this disassembly, and then I decided to throw it back together and make that portion of the video. This engine was a good engine because it had many of the real common wear spots or things that you need to kind of really focus on with the Banshee. It included them, including a dual cylinder failure caused by one mechanical failure. So this engine was a good little engine. It ran hard. I followed the customer for a little while and his doings, and he did really well with it for what was here, and very respectable. So we're going to refresh everything and move forward. It's going to become a 7mm stock cylinder, and he's going to go back at it for round 2, and it'll be exciting to you know, kind of document this build as we go. I don't know how detailed I'm going to be. Some of the stuff just requires tooling that's not in your everyday shop, but we will cover everything, and we'll follow this along with a video series until the end of this build. So I appreciate you watching on this part, and we'll come back next with splitting the case and laying the transmission out for inspection.